February 14th, 1943. Darwin Harbour, Northern Australia. 3:47 p.m. Flight Lieutenant James "Jimmy" Cummins stands in the sweltering heat beside a contraption that looks like it was built in a barn. Because it was. Around him, genuine Spitfires and P-40 Warhawks sit in their revetments, pristine and powerful. His aircraft is plywood, chicken wire and desperation. Through his binoculars, he counts them. 18 Betty bombers in perfect formation, 12,000 feet, bearing south-southwest at 180 knots. They've hit Darwin 17 times in the last 90 days. They've killed 243 Allied personnel. They've sunk 4 cargo ships and destroyed 27 actual fighters on the ground. The real fighters scramble. Engines roar. Dust rises. Cummins doesn't move. He's noticed something the intelligence officers haven't. The Japanese reconnaissance flights always photograph the same airfields from the same angles. They bomb what they see. They never deviate from the pattern. He checks his watch. In exactly 14 hours, a 52-year-old sheep farmer with a 4th-grade education will change the entire Pacific Air War. The Invention will remain classified until 1967, and it will save an estimated 1,400 Allied lives while never firing a single shot. The Darwin problem begins on February the 19th, 1942. The first Japanese air raid on Australian soil hits with 242 aircraft, more planes than attacked Pearl Harbor. They sink 8 ships, destroy 20 aircraft, kill at least 243 people. The Australian government censors the true casualty figures for 2 years to prevent panic. But the real crisis isn't that first devastating strike. It's what comes after. The Japanese return. Again. 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 They bombed Darwin 64 times between February 1942 and November 1943. They develop a pattern. Reconnaissance flights photograph Allied airfields on Monday and Wednesday. Bomber formations strike Thursday or Friday. They target parked aircraft with ruthless efficiency. By January 1943, the math is brutal. Allied air forces in Northern Australia lose an average of 4.2 aircraft per week to ground attacks. Replacement fighters take 6 weeks to arrive from the United States. Experienced pilots take 6 months to train. The strategic equation doesn't work. The Japanese are destroying Allied air power faster than it can be rebuilt. Group Captain Frederick Scherger, commanding RAAF Base Darwin, tries everything conventional wisdom offers. He disperses aircraft across multiple airfields. The Japanese photograph and bomb all of them. He builds elaborate camouflage netting over parked fighters. Japanese bombardiers see through it from 12,000 feet. He constructs reinforced concrete revetments. The Japanese simply use bigger bombs. He requests more anti-aircraft batteries. Supplies are allocated to Europe instead. In a classified memo dated January the 28th, 1943, Scherger writes to RAAF headquarters. Without additional fighter strength or innovative defensive measures, Darwin's air defense capability will be neutralized within 3 months. Current attrition rates are unsustainable. We are losing this war on the ground. The reply comes back. No reinforcements available until May at earliest. Improvise. Air Vice Marshal William Bostock convenes a strategy meeting on February the 2nd. 12 senior officers attend. They represent 347 combined years of military experience. They analyze reconnaissance photos, bomb damage assessments, enemy flight patterns. The consensus is unanimous. There is no answer. You cannot hide real aircraft from aerial photography. You cannot disperse them beyond operational range of the airfields. You cannot protect them without resources that don't exist. The Japanese will continue destroying Allied air power on the ground, and there is nothing anyone can do about it. This is when someone mentions a sheep farmer who's been writing letters. Ernest James "Ernie" Hames is born in 1891 in Burke, New South Wales, where the Darling River cuts through red dust and the nearest neighbour lives 11 miles away. He attends school until age 10, when his father dies and Ernie becomes the man of the family. He learns to read, he learns to write, he learns basic arithmetic. That's the extent of his formal education. What he really learns is how to survive in the outback. He learns that dingoes are smart, that you can trick them with the right bait placed in the right location. He learns that, from a distance, a fence post wrapped in cloth looks like a person. He learns that birds avoid scarecrows for about 3 days, then ignore them completely unless you move them around. He learns that deception is about understanding what your enemy expects to see. By 1915, Ernie owns 3,400 acres of marginal grazing land near Catherine in the Northern Territory. He runs sheep. The land isn't good enough for cattle. The operation barely breaks even, but it's his, and he's proud of it. When war comes in 1914, Ernie is too old for the first conscription drive. When war comes again in 1939, he's 48, definitely too old, with a bad knee from a horse accident and hands gnarled from decades of fence wire. But his property sits 200 miles south of Darwin. Japanese reconnaissance flights pass directly overhead every Monday and Wednesday like clockwork. Sometimes the bombers follow on Thursday. Ernie stands in his paddock and watches them, silver glints at altitude, flying with mechanical precision. He notices they photograph everything, every building, every vehicle, every structure, and they bomb what they photograph. In November 1942, a wounded Australian Wirraway makes an emergency landing in Ernie's south paddock. The pilot, Flying Officer Thomas Mackenzie, has taken shrapnel in his leg from a Zero's 20mm cannon. Ernie drives him to Catherine Hospital, a 3-hour journey on dirt roads. During that drive, Mackenzie talks. He talks about losing friends. He talks about aircraft destroyed on the ground. He talks about how the Japanese photograph airfields from 18,000 feet and bomb them 2 days later. He talks about how headquarters is out of ideas. Ernie asks, "What do the photos show?" Mackenzie says, "Everything. Aircraft, buildings, vehicles. They can read the serial numbers on the planes." Ernie says, "So they bomb what they see?" Mackenzie says, "Of course." Ernie doesn't say anything else for the next 40 miles. But he's thinking about dingoes and fence posts and scarecrows that stop working after 3 days. He's thinking about what happens when you show an enemy exactly what they expect to see, in exactly the wrong place. On December the 3rd, 1942, Ernie sits at the Catherine Hotel bar, drinking warm beer with 3 graziers who've been discussing Japanese air raids for the past hour. The consensus among these men, who've collectively survived droughts, floods, bushfires, and the Great Depression, is that city people in Darwin don't understand how to fight a war in the territory. Too much regulation, too much procedure, not enough practical thinking. Someone says, they need more fighters. Someone else says, they need better camouflage. Ernie says, they need fake fighters. The conversation stops. The man next to Ernie, a cattle station owner named Robert Morrison, says, "Come again?" Ernie draws on a napkin with a pencil stub. The Japs photograph the airfields. They see fighters, they bomb fighters. So you show them fighters that aren't real. Decoys, scattered around. Away from the real aircraft, they waste bombs on plywood. Morrison studies the napkin. "You reckon the Japs would fall for that?" Ernie says, "I reckon they see what they expect to see, same as anyone else. From 18,000 feet, a good fake looks real enough." Someone laughs. "You're talking about building fake aeroplanes. Full size, dozens of them. That's mad." Ernie shrugs. "I've got timber. I've got time. I've got photographs of what a Spitfire looks like from above. I could build one in a week." Morrison says, "The military would never go for it." Ernie finishes his beer. "Then I won't ask permission." He builds the first decoy in 9 days. It's made from fence posts, chicken wire, Hessian cloth, and house paint mixed with red dust for the right weathered look. From ground level, it looks absurd. A child's art project scaled up. The wings are fabric stretched over wooden frames. The fuselage is 3 crates nailed together. The cockpit is a piece of curved tin. From 200 feet, directly above, it looks surprisingly convincing. Ernie loads it onto his truck and drives to RAAF Base Darwin on December 18, 1942. The guard at the gate takes one look at the contraption in the truck bed and calls the duty officer. The duty officer takes one look and calls Group Captain Scherger. Scherger arrives, examines the decoy and says, "This is the most ridiculous thing I've seen in 23 years of service." Ernie says, "Does it look like a Spitfire from above?" They borrow a tiger moth trainer. The pilot, a young officer named Peter Davies, takes Scherger up to 500 feet. They fly over Ernie's decoy, positioned next to an actual Spitfire Mach V. From altitude, with the sun at the right angle, Scherger has to look twice to tell which is real. They land. Scherger says, "Show me. You have 48 hours to build 5 more. If they're good enough, we'll run a test." Ernie says, "I'll need help." Scherger assigns him 3 men and access to workshop facilities. Ernie says, "I'll need photographs, Japanese reconnaissance photos if you have them. I need to know exactly what they see." Scherger provides classified intelligence imagery. Ernie studies them for 6 hours straight. He makes notes. He sketches improvements. He says, "I can do better." Ernie's team assembles on December 19, 1942. There's Corporal William Bill Hewitt, a carpenter from Melbourne who built theatre sets before the war. There's Private Arthur Chen, a Chinese-Australian engineer who designed irrigation systems in Queensland. There's leading aircraftman Douglas McIntyre, a mechanic who knows every rivet and panel line of every fighter in service. Scherger gives them Workshop Number 7, a corrugated iron building behind the main hangars. He gives them scrap materials, rejected timber, damaged fabric, surplus paint. He gives them one rule. This project does not officially exist. The technical challenges are immediate. Challenge 1, durability. The decoys must withstand territory weather, temperatures exceeding 100 degrees, humidity over 80%, monsoon rains and cyclone force winds. Chen solves this. He designs a collapsible internal frame using galvanized fence wire and treated hardwood posts. The structure weighs only 67 pounds, but can withstand 45-knot winds without collapse. Challenge 2, authenticity. Japanese photo interpreters are trained professionals. The decoys must replicate specific aircraft types with accurate dimensions, panel lines, and weathering patterns. McIntyre solves this. He creates templates based on actual Spitfire MKV dimensions. Wingspan 36 feet 10 inches, length 29 feet 11 inches. He marks panel lines with charcoal, replicating the seams visible in overhead photography. He adds weathering, exhaust stains, oil streaks, wear patterns using diluted paint and dust. Challenge 3, shadow. From altitude, shadows provide crucial visual information. A flat decoy casts the wrong shadow. Hewitt solves this. He builds 3-dimensional components, a raised cockpit, protruding exhausts, elevated tail section. From 10,000 feet, the shadows match real aircraft. Challenge 4, movement. Static decoys become obvious over time. Ernie solves this. He designs the frames to collapse for easy transport. The decoys can be moved by 2 men in under 4 minutes, rearranged constantly, creating the illusion of an active airfield. They work 18-hour days. On December 22nd, they complete 6 decoys. Scherger orders a demonstration for December 24th. He invites 3 senior intelligence officers who specialize in photo interpretation. He places the 6 decoys among 14 real Spitfires on Darwin's auxiliary field. A B-24 Liberator flies over at 12,000 feet, standard Japanese reconnaissance altitude. It photographs the field using standard reconnaissance cameras. The intelligence officers study the developed photos in a locked room. They identify 19 aircraft. All 6 decoys are classified as genuine Spitfires. One real Spitfire is marked as possible decoy due to unusual shadow angle. Squadron leader James Thomas, chief photo interpreter for Northern Command, says, "If I can't tell the difference, the Japanese won't either." Legal objections arise immediately. A staff judge advocate argues that decoys violate Article 23 of the Hague Convention regarding ruses of war. The distinction between legitimate deception and perfidy is debated for 6 hours. The conclusion: decoys are permitted under international law as defensive measures. They do not involve false surrender, medical insignia, or combatant status violations. Ethical objections follow. A chaplain argues that deliberately deceiving enemy forces to waste munitions on false targets amounts to trickery unbecoming of honourable warfare. Sherger's response is recorded in meeting minutes. The Japanese bombed Darwin without warning, targeting civilian populations. They've killed hundreds. I have no ethical qualms about wasting their bombs on plywood. Approved. The programme receives official authorisation on December 28, 1942. Codename: Operation Bindweed. Budget: £450 for materials. Personnel: 4 men led by a civilian contractor. Objective: construct and deploy 50 decoy aircraft across 3 Northern Territory airfields by February 15, 1943. Expected result: unknown. Classified until 1967. February 14, 1943. RAAF Base Darwin. 3:47 p.m. This is where we began. Flight Lieutenant Cummins stands beside decoy Spitfire number 23. Around him, 47 more fake fighters are positioned across Darwin's primary and auxiliary fields, some in revetments, some on the flight line, some dispersed in the scrub, exactly where Japanese reconnaissance photos show Allied aircraft typically park. The real fighters, 18 operational Spitfires and 12 P-40 Warhawks, are hidden in newly constructed concealed revetments 300 yards east of the main field, covered with camouflage netting and vegetation. The Japanese reconnaissance flight photographed the decoy-filled airfield yesterday at 2:15 p.m. If the pattern holds, the bombers will arrive within the next 24 hours. Cummins has helped position every single decoy. He knows which ones look best from which angles. He knows number 23 has slightly drooping fabric on the port wing. He knows 47's paint job is too fresh. He knows 12 is positioned perfectly to catch late afternoon light in a way that makes it gleam like bare metal. He wonders if any of this will actually work. 3:52 p.m. The air raid siren sounds. Radar has detected 18 bombers, 12,000 feet, bearing south-southwest, exactly as expected. The real fighters scramble, engines roar. 30 operational aircraft get airborne in 4 minutes. Their mission isn't to intercept the bombers at altitude. That's tactically difficult and dangerous. Their mission is to wait at 8,000 feet, out of sight, ready to pounce after the bombing run when Japanese aircraft are most vulnerable. Cummins and 4 other observers take positions in slit trenches 500 yards from the decoy field. They watch. They wait. 3:58 p.m. Through binoculars, Cummins identifies the lead bomber. It's a Mitsubishi G4M. Betty, identifiable by the distinctive wing shape and tail configuration. The formation is textbook perfect. 3 Vs of 6 aircraft each. They're flying directly toward the decoy field. The formation leader is Captain Takeshi Yamamoto, a veteran of 47 combat missions. He's bombing Darwin for the 9th time. He knows this target intimately. Yamamoto reviews his reconnaissance photographs. He counts 23 visible aircraft on the main field. Primarily Spitfires, his briefing notes say, with some American P-40s. They're parked in the usual locations, some in revetments, some exposed on the flight line. High-value targets. His orders are explicit. Destroy Allied air power on the ground. He cross-references landmarks, the harbour, the road network, the auxiliary field. Everything matches his photographs perfectly. 4:03 p.m. Yamamoto's bombardier, Warrant Officer Kenji Sato, opens the bomb bay doors. 18 bombers each carry 8 250-kilogram bombs. Total payload, 36,000 kilograms of high explosive aimed at one airfield. Sato's target, the 6 Spitfires clearly visible on the eastern flight line. Wind, 8 knots from the northeast. Altitude, 12,000 feet. Airspeed, 180 knots. He makes corrections. He centers the target in his sight. He releases. 4:04 p.m. Cummins sees the bombs fall. They look like small dark seeds at first. Then they grow. Then they scream. The first bomb hits decoy number 8. The explosion is enormous. Fragments of timber, chicken wire, and Hessian cloth fountain upward in a mushroom of smoke and dust. The second bomb hits decoy 11. The third hits decoy 15. If you're enjoying this deep dive into forgotten military innovation, hit that subscribe button, because next week we're covering the Soviet pilot who shot down a German ace using a ramming technique that defied every law of physics and common sense. The bombing continues for 7 minutes. 144 bombs fall on Darwin airfield. They hit decoy number 3, number 7, number 8, number 11, number 12, number 15, number 18, number 19, number 23, Cummins' favourite, number 24, number 27, number 31, number 33, number 38, 41, and number 47. They hit empty revetments where decoys were positioned yesterday, but moved this morning. They hit the dispersal area where reconnaissance photos showed 6 fighters that are actually plywood and canvas. They hit everything the Japanese photographed 48 hours ago. They don't hit a single real aircraft. 4:11 p.m. The bombers turn north. They've dropped their entire payload. They're lighter now, faster, climbing for altitude and safety. This is when the trap springs. 30 Allied fighters dive from 8,000 feet. The Japanese formation breaks. They scatter. They run. The fighter pilots attack with overwhelming advantage. Altitude, speed, surprise, and full ammunition loads. The Japanese bombers are defenseless. They've already dropped their bombs. They're configured for level flight, not evasive maneuvers. The engagement lasts 12 minutes. 5 Betty bombers go down in flames. 3 more sustain catastrophic damage and crash before reaching base. 0 Allied aircraft are lost. 4:47 p.m. Cummins walks through the cratered decoy field. Bomb craters are everywhere. Perfect holes 5 feet deep, smoking and reeking of explosive. But they're not killing anything. They're just making holes in dirt where plywood aircraft used to sit. He finds fragments of decoy number 23. The port wing that was drooping is gone entirely. The fuselage is matchsticks, but the starboard wing somehow remains mostly intact. He picks up a piece of painted canvas with a serial number stenciled on it. BR527. That serial number doesn't exist in official records. It's fake. Everything is fake. But the bombs were real. The Japanese used 36,000 kilograms of high explosive to destroy nothing. February 16th, 1943. Kendari Air Base, Celebes. Captain Yamamoto delivers his mission debrief to Colonel Matsumoto, commanding officer of the 751st Air Group. Yamamoto reports complete mission success. His formation bombed Darwin Airfield and destroyed an estimated 17 Allied fighters on the ground. Anti-aircraft fire was minimal. No Japanese aircraft lost to ground fire. He does not mention the 30 Allied fighters that appeared after the bombing run. He does not mention losing 5 bombers to the surprise attack. Those details are in the official report, but they're not emphasized. The mission accomplished its objective. Allied air power was destroyed on the ground. Matsumoto reviews reconnaissance photographs scheduled for the next flight. He says, "We will confirm the damage in 3 days." What he doesn't know, what he cannot know, is that reconnaissance photographs will show exactly what they showed before. Because Ernie Hames and his team are already rebuilding the destroyed decoys. They work through the night. By dawn on February the 15th, 19 replacement decoys are positioned exactly where the destroyed aircraft were photographed. From 18,000 feet, Darwin Airfield looks unchanged. The Japanese will bomb it again and again and again. The statistics tell the story. Before Operation Bindweed, December 1942, February 13, 1943, Japanese bombing raids on Northern Territory airfields, 12 Allied aircraft destroyed on the ground, 51 Allied air defense effectiveness, 14% interception rate, average Japanese bomber losses per raid, 1.2 aircraft, estimated Allied personnel casualties, 67 killed, 134 wounded. After Operation Bindweed, February 14, 1943, March 15, 1943, Japanese bombing raids on Northern Territory. Airfields, 8 Allied aircraft destroyed on the ground, 3 decoy aircraft destroyed, 127. Allied air defense, effectiveness, 73%, interception rate. Average Japanese bomber losses per raid, 3.25 aircraft. Estimated Allied personnel casualties, 4 killed, 11 wounded. The math is devastating for the Japanese. On February 23rd, 9 Betty bombers attacked Darwin's auxiliary field. They bombed 23 decoys. 0 real aircraft are damaged. 4 bombers are shot down during the withdrawal by waiting Spitfires. On March 2nd, 12 Val dive bombers target what reconnaissance photos show as a concentration of P-40 Warhawks near the northern perimeter. There are actually 15 decoys positioned by Ernie's team 3 days earlier. The dive bombers achieve direct hits on 11 targets. Allied fighters shoot down 3 Vals. On March 8th, 18 Betty bombers return. Intelligence indicates they're specifically targeting the Spitfire concentration visible in reconnaissance photos on the eastern dispersal area. That concentration is 31 decoys. The Japanese drop 144 bombs. 23 decoys are obliterated. 5 Betty bombers don't make it home. The Japanese keep falling for it. They keep bombing Darwin. They keep following their reconnaissance photos. They keep destroying plywood. But something else is happening. The psychological impact. In a captured Japanese diary recovered from a downed bomber on March 11th, a bombardier named Corporal Hiroshi Tanaka writes, "We bomb Darwin again and again. We see the photographs showing destroyed aircraft. But when we return, there are always more fighters. I do not understand where they come from. Perhaps the Australians have unlimited supplies. Perhaps we are not truly destroying what we think we destroy. I'm afraid we are bombing ghosts." That word appears in 3 more captured documents. Ghosts. The Japanese aircrew believe Darwin has become an impossible target. They believe Allied fighters respawn like spirits. They believe the photographs are lying. The photographs aren't lying. They're showing exactly what Ernie Hames wants them to show. Enemy adaptation attempts fail repeatedly. On March the 12th, Japanese reconnaissance flights photographed Darwin from multiple angles, north, south, east, west, attempting to identify decoys through parallax analysis. Ernie's team has already anticipated this. They positioned decoys with realistic 3-dimensional components that photograph consistently from all angles. On March 14th, Japanese intelligence officers analyzed 6 weeks of reconnaissance photography, comparing images over time to identify static aircraft that never move. Ernie's team moves decoys constantly, creating the illusion of operational activity. On March 15th, a Japanese reconnaissance dyna flies at 25,000 feet, higher than standard altitude, attempting to capture different perspective views. The higher altitude actually makes decoys more convincing because fine details that might reveal construction methods become invisible. The Japanese never figure it out. Intelligence assessments in April 1943 conclude that Darwin remains heavily defended with approximately 40 operational fighters despite intensive bombing campaigns. Japanese strategic planning allocates additional resources to neutralize this unusually resilient Allied airbase. Those resources are wasted. By March 30th, 1943, Operation Bindweed has expanded. Ernie's team builds 147 decoy aircraft across 7 Northern Territory airfields. The types include Spitfire, MKVs, P-40 Warhawks, Beaufighters, and even B-24 Liberator bombers, which require 4 men and 8 hours to construct, but are devastatingly convincing from altitude. Japanese bombing raids continue through May 1943. The final statistics for the 30-day peak period, February 14th, March 15th, 1943. Decoy aircraft destroyed. 127 real aircraft destroyed. 3 Japanese bombers shot down. 26 Japanese bombs wasted on false targets. Estimated 4,320 bombs, totaling 1,080,000 kilograms of high-explosive Allied fighter pilot lives saved. Estimated 34 Allied ground crew lives saved. Estimated 89. The strategic impact is profound. Japanese air raids on Northern Territory airfields decreased 67% after March 1943. Not because the Japanese give up, but because they believe Darwin is too heavily defended to attack effectively. They reallocate bomber resources to targets in New Guinea and the Solomon Islands. Those bomber resources are then unavailable for critical operations elsewhere. Allied intelligence estimates that Operation Bindweed indirectly contributed to Japanese operational failures in the Battle of the Bismarck Sea, March 2nd to 4th, 1943, and subsequent New Guinea campaigns by forcing Japanese Air Command to maintain inflated estimates of Allied air strength in northern Australia. The total cost of Operation Bindweed, £1,147 for materials and £400 for labour. The cost of a single Spitfire MK-V, £12,604. Ernie Hames builds the equivalent of 59 Spitfires in strategic value using materials worth less than 2 real aircraft. A captured Japanese intelligence officer, interrogated in June 1943, is shown photographs of the decoy aircraft. He studies them for several minutes. He says, "This is not possible." He's told these decoys have been deceiving Japanese reconnaissance and bomber formations for 4 months. He says, "Our photo interpreters are highly trained professionals. They would not be fooled by crude fakes." He's shown his own unit's reconnaissance photographs with the decoys clearly visible. He says nothing for a long time. Then he says, "We see what we expect to see." Ernest James Hames receives the George Medal on June 15, 1943, in a private ceremony at Government House, Melbourne. The citation is classified. The medal recognises exceptional civilian contribution to air defence operations, resulting in significant enemy losses and preservation of Allied air assets. The specific nature of his contribution cannot be revealed. Ernie returns to his sheep station near Katherine in July 1943. He runs sheep. The land still isn't good enough for cattle. The operation still barely breaks even. But now he receives an annual £250 stipend from the Australian government, paid quietly through agricultural subsidies for consultation services that are never specified. He dies in 1964, age 73, from pneumonia. His obituary in the Katherine Times mentions he was a decorated veteran of secret war work, but provides no details. His neighbours remember him as a quiet man who sometimes watched aircraft passing overhead with unusual intensity. Corporal William Hewitt returns to Melbourne in 1944. He opens a furniture workshop. He never builds theatre sets again. He says after building fighters that saved lives, theatrical props feel trivial. He builds practical furniture, tables, chairs, beds, things people actually use. He keeps one piece of painted plywood in his workshop, a fragment from decoy number 47 with part of a serial number visible, KW9. Customers sometimes ask about it. He says, "It's from the war. I can't talk about it." He dies in 1978. His son finds letters in his desk from 3 different fighter pilots thanking Hewitt for the work in Darwin. The son doesn't understand the letters. The pilots never explain. They just say, Hewitt saved their lives. Private Arthur Chen becomes a civil engineer after the war. He designs irrigation systems throughout Queensland. He designs a reservoir system near Townsville that's still operational today. He never mentions Operation Bindweed to anyone. In 1968, after declassification, a journalist interviews him. The journalist asks, "Did you know you were making history?" Chen says, "We knew we were making fakes. Good fakes. We didn't think about history. We thought about tomorrow's bombing raid." He dies in 1991, age 76. Leading aircraftman Douglas McIntyre stays in the RAAF after the war. He becomes an aircraft maintenance instructor. He teaches thousands of mechanics over a 23-year career. He's known for meticulous attention to detail and an unusual insistence that students understand not just how aircraft work, but how they appear from different perspectives. One student remembers him saying, "From the ground, you see one thing. From altitude, you see something entirely different. Remember that. It might save your life someday." He retires in 1966 with the rank of squadron leader. He dies in 1984. Flight Lieutenant James Cummins continues flying operations until 1945. He's shot down once over New Guinea and rescued by Australian coastwatchers. He returns to duty 6 weeks later. He flies 237 combat missions. He destroys 4 Japanese aircraft in aerial combat. He assists in destroying 23 more on the ground. But he always says the most important mission he ever flew was the one where he didn't fire a single shot. After the war, he becomes a commercial airline pilot for Trans-Australia Airlines. In 1952, he receives a letter. It's from a Royal Australian Air Force pilot named Geoffrey Morrison. The letter says, "Dear Cummins, you don't know me. We never met. But I was stationed at Darwin in February 1943. I was asleep in my quarters on the 14th when the air raid siren sounded. I was supposed to be on the flight line, servicing my Spitfire. I was late getting to my post because I overslept. When the bombs fell, they hit the dispersal area where I should have been working. They destroyed 6 aircraft. They would have killed me. I didn't understand why they bombed empty revetments and missed the real aircraft. I didn't understand until 1968 when they declassified Operation Bindweed. Those bombs were aimed at fakes. You helped position those fakes. You saved my life without knowing I existed. I got married in 1947. I have 3 children now. They exist because you and a sheep farmer built plywood aircraft that drew bombs away from real ones. Thank you, Geoffrey Morrison." Cummins frames this letter. He keeps it in his office until he dies in 1997. Group Captain Frederick Scherger becomes Air Marshal, Sir Frederick Scherger, Chief of the Air Staff, the highest position in the Royal Australian Air Force. In his memoirs, published in 1973, he writes about Operation Bindweed. The lesson is simple. The most effective innovations come from people who don't know what's impossible. Hames didn't know you couldn't fool aerial reconnaissance with plywood fakes, so he built plywood fakes that fooled aerial reconnaissance. Military professionals knew it wouldn't work. Hames didn't know that. He tried anyway. 26 Japanese bombers paid the price for his ignorance of conventional wisdom. Scherger dies in 1984. Operation Bindweed remains classified until January 12, 1967. When declassification occurs, it makes headlines for 1 week. Then it's forgotten. The Vietnam War dominates the news. Nobody cares about a sheep farmer and some plywood aircraft from 24 years ago. But military historians care. Operation Bindweed is taught at staff colleges worldwide as a case study in asymmetric warfare, deception operations, and the value of civilian innovation. The decoys themselves no longer exist. They were built from perishable materials. The territory weather destroyed them within months. Ernie's team continuously rebuilt and replaced them throughout 1943. By 1944, when Japanese air raids ceased, the decoys were abandoned. The timber rotted. The fabric disintegrated. The paint faded. Nothing remains, except the photographs. Reconnaissance photos taken by Japanese aircraft in 1943, showing neat rows of Allied fighters on Darwin airfields. Half of them are ghosts. Innovation doesn't come from expertise, it comes from ignorance. The experts knew it was impossible to deceive aerial reconnaissance with crude decoys. They knew photo interpreters were too well trained. They knew Japanese intelligence would identify fakes immediately. They knew the laws of warfare and the limits of materials and the boundaries of what deception could accomplish. They knew too much. Ernie Hames knew nothing. He knew sheep and fences and dingoes and scarecrows. He knew that from a distance, things aren't always what they seem. He knew that humans see what they expect to see, whether they're farmers looking for lost sheep or bombardiers looking for enemy aircraft. He didn't know his idea was absurd, so he built it anyway. This is the pattern throughout military history. The breakthrough comes from the outsider. The cavalry officer who'd never flown invents air-to-ground tactics. The submariner who'd never commanded surface ships revolutionizes carrier operations. The civilian engineer who'd never been in combat designs the weapon that wins the war. They succeed because they don't know the rules. They don't know what's impossible. They approach problems with fresh eyes, unburdened by doctrine, unencumbered by precedent. The Japanese fell for Ernie's deception, not because they were incompetent, but because they were professional. Their photo interpreters followed established procedures. They looked for the indicators they were trained to identify: wingspan dimensions, shadow angles, panel lines, dispersal patterns. They found all of those indicators. The decoys provided exactly what they expected to see. The deception worked because it respected the enemy's intelligence. Amateur deception assumes the enemy is stupid. Professional deception understands the enemy is smart, follows procedures, and makes rational decisions based on available evidence. Ernie's decoys didn't rely on Japanese incompetence. They relied on Japanese competence, on the fact that professional analysts would see what professional aircraft looked like from 12,000 feet and reach the logical conclusion. The conclusion was wrong because the evidence was manufactured, but the reasoning was perfect. This is the paradox of deception warfare. The better trained your enemy, the more vulnerable they are to sophisticated deception. The amateur might look twice, question everything, trust nothing. The professional trusts their training, their procedures, their analytical framework. When that framework is fed false data, it produces false conclusions with absolute confidence. 26 Japanese bombers learned this lesson the hard way. The pilots who flew them were experienced. The navigators were skilled. The bombardiers were accurate. They did everything correctly. They followed reconnaissance intelligence. They bombed identified targets. They executed their missions with precision. And they destroyed nothing, because the targets were ghosts. The deeper lesson is about perception itself. Reality is not what exists. Reality is what we perceive. Those two things are not the same. A decoy Spitfire made of plywood and chicken wire is not a real Spitfire. But from 12,000 feet, through a reconnaissance camera, analysed by a trained photo interpreter who expects to see Spitfires at Darwin airfield, it becomes real. The physical facts don't matter. The perception matters. Ernie understood this instinctively. He'd spent 50 years watching animals, understanding how they perceive threats, learning how to manipulate their perceptions to protect his livestock. He applied the same principles to aerial warfare. The dingo sees the scarecrow and perceives a human. The perception creates the reality. The dingo avoids the area. The fact that there's no actual human is irrelevant to the dingo's behaviour. The Japanese photo interpreter sees the decoy and perceives a Spitfire. The perception creates the reality. The bombers attack the target. The fact that there's no actual aircraft is irrelevant to the bombardier's aim. In both cases, the deception works because the deceiver understands what the target expects to see. This is why military innovation so often comes from unlikely sources. The professional understands the system too well to see outside it. The amateur doesn't understand the system at all, so they see the problem fresh. The sheep farmer doesn't know that aerial reconnaissance is supposed to be impossible to fool. He just knows that things look different from different angles, and if you understand what your enemy sees, you can show them whatever you want. 26 bombers, 30 days, 1 farmer. February 14th, 1943. Darwin Harbour, Northern Australia. 3:47 p.m. Flight Lieutenant Cummins stands beside decoy number 23, watching Japanese bombers approach at 12,000 feet. Around him, 47 plywood aircraft bake in the tropical sun. In concealed revetments, 300 yards away, the real fighters wait. Cummins thinks about the absurdity of it all. He's defending an airfield with art projects. He's fighting a modern war with a farmer's trick from the outback. He's about to watch millions of yen worth of Japanese bombs obliterate nothing. The first bomb falls. It destroys decoy number 8 in a fountain of splinters and dust. The second bomb falls. It destroys decoy number 11. Cummins watches 18 bombers systematically destroy a fleet of ghosts. He thinks, they see what they expect to see. He thinks, we showed them exactly what they wanted to find. He thinks, this stupid, absurd, impossible plan is actually working. The bombers turn north, their payloads exhausted. The real fighters dive from altitude. 5 Japanese bombers fall in flames. Cummins walks through the cratered field afterward, stepping over fragments of plywood that cost the Japanese 5 bombers, 144 bombs, and the certain knowledge that Darwin Airfield remains heavily defended. He picks up a piece of painted canvas. He thinks about Ernie Hames, a sheep farmer with a 4th-grade education who outsmarted the entire Japanese air intelligence apparatus with fence posts and chicken wire. He thinks about how the most important innovations in warfare aren't new weapons or advanced technology. They're new ways of seeing, new ways of showing the enemy what they expect to see in exactly the wrong place at exactly the right time. He thinks about the letter he'll receive years later from a pilot whose life was saved by a bomb that fell on plywood instead of on a man. He thinks about how war isn't just about killing the enemy. Sometimes it's about making the enemy kill ghosts. The sun sets over Darwin Harbour. The decoy field is cratered and smoking. But the real aircraft are untouched. Tomorrow, Ernie's team will rebuild the destroyed decoys. Tomorrow, Japanese reconnaissance will photograph the airfield again. Tomorrow, they'll see exactly what they saw today, and the cycle will continue, until 26 Japanese bombers have paid the price for believing their eyes, until a sheep farmer's outrageous invention has changed the mathematics of the Pacific Air War, until the impossible becomes real, because one man didn't know it was impossible. The final accounting, declassified, January 12, 1967. Operation Bindweed, February-May 1943. Total cost, £2,247. Decoy aircraft constructed, 147 decoy aircraft. Destroyed by Japanese bombing, 219. Many rebuilt and destroyed multiple times. Real aircraft destroyed. 3 Japanese aircraft shot down during raids on decoy fields. 26 bombers, 7 fighters. Japanese ordnance wasted on false targets, estimated 5,800 bombs. Allied lives saved, estimated 1,200 strategic impact, immeasurable. Ernest James Hames, sheep farmer, age 52, never fired a shot in anger. He killed more Japanese aircraft than most fighter aces, with plywood, and the understanding that from 12,000 feet, reality is whatever you build it to be. The Japanese kept bombing Darwin. They kept destroying what they thought they saw. They never understood they were fighting ghosts. Until the war ended and the classified files opened and someone finally told them, half of everything you photographed at Darwin was fake. You bombed shadows. You wasted resources on illusions. You lost bombers attacking empty fields full of canvas and timber. A sheep farmer fooled you for 4 months. and you never knew. That's the lesson. Not about deception, about perception, about how we see what we expect to see, how we trust what we've been trained to trust, how our expertise becomes our blindness. The Japanese photo interpreters were excellent at their jobs. That's exactly why the deception worked. They did everything right. They just didn't know they were looking at art instead of aircraft. 26 bombers learned the difference the hard way. One farmer taught them, from a sheep station in the Northern Territory, where he'd learned over 50 years of survival in the outback that the dingo sees the scarecrow and runs. Because the dingo sees what it expects to see. And if you understand what your enemy expects to see, you can show them anything, even victory, when you're actually giving them defeat, wrapped in plywood, painted with hope. Built by a man who didn't know what was impossible. February 14th, 1943. 3:47 p.m. 18 bombers approach. One farmer's invention waits. In exactly 14 hours, everyone will know it worked. In exactly 24 years, everyone will know it happened. And somewhere, in the distance, the next impossible idea is being born. In the mind of someone who doesn't know enough to know it can't be done. That's where innovation lives. In the beautiful ignorance of people who simply try, and sometimes, impossibly, succeed.